Hello, my name is Joe Weeks, and I want to thank you for watching this video. In today's video, we're going to introduce you to the longtime best friend that you never knew you had. So make sure to stay tuned for that. We'll also talk about debt from a different perspective than it's usually portrayed. So I think you'll enjoy both of those. Thank you for joining us today. So, quick question, why do I do this? And the easy answer is really that I desire to see you be free. I've done a lot of financial counseling with folks over the years who have struggled with debt, and I've seen how debt has limited their options in life so severely. They're not able to live the lives that they want to live. And that really is what I want you to enjoy. I want you to live life fully, to pursue your dreams, and to have the life you desire to have. So that's why we do this today. All right, we're going to begin today with a contest. This is a fun contest. You'll really enjoy this. It's between two students who are early in life, and the contest revolves around which one of the two will have the most money available to them at age 65 for retirement. Now, not that money will make you happy, it won't, but that is still nonetheless the nature of the contest, which one will have the most money at that time. So let's take a look at how they're going to get there. Both of them right now are saving $2,000 a year. That's the same. They're both earning the same rate of return each year. That's not a point of differentiation. Student number one saves for 8 years total. Student number two saves for 40 years total. Okay, there's a pretty big difference. And therefore, student number one saves a total of $16,000, and student number two saves $80,000. All right. Often I will refer to saving money as work because it's really easy to spend money, but it takes effort and work, to save it. And so, student number one did $16,000 worth of work savings, and student number two did 80. Student number one begins at age 18. Student number two begins at age 26. Okay, little difference there. And student number one ends, therefore, at age 25, because he only saves for 8 years. And student number two ends at age 65, saves for 40 years. Okay, so those are the factors that will affect how much money they have at retirement. In light of this, what do you think? Who's going to have the most money at retirement? Well, let's go ahead and reveal the answer. And I must admit, I am amazed by this. And I think you should be too. Let's spend a little bit of time thinking about this. There were really only two variables that were different here. The first variable is the amount of savings or the amount of work that the two students did. And student number two did 5 times as much work as student number one. $80,000 is 5 times $16,000. So he had a substantial advantage, a 5x advantage over student number one. Student number one only had one thing going for her, and that was that she started a few years earlier, right? She began at age 18, and he begins at age 26. Like, okay, but a few years, is that really enough? I mean, would that be the difference between, would that overcome a 5x advantage on the amount of money saved and invested? That seems hard to believe, honestly, but it is true. It is amazing how powerful even a small amount of time is. Student number one had a little bit more time. Student number two had a lot more savings, and student number one ended up winning the contest with the most money for retirement. And that is shocking. What's shocking about it is how powerful time must be, that time could overcome that substantial advantage that student number one, two had. That is amazing. And so I mentioned earlier that you have a long-time BFF that you never knew about, and that best friend is time. Time will do so much for you if you allow it to. So I'm going to strongly encourage today that you fully take advantage of every ounce of time you have, whether you have a lot of time because you're young, or whether you have a medium amount or not that much. Time will still do incredible things for you. Time is a great friend, but you have to know to take advantage of it. The second thing I want to say here is that this gives me tremendous hope and encouragement, because there are some of us listening perhaps who have high incomes and they can afford to wait until later in life to begin saving for retirement, and they can compensate for that by saving a lot of money each year because their income allows them to do that. But for most of us, we have average incomes or even below average incomes. And what this tells me is that even if you have an average income or a below average income, this girl saved $16,000 versus $80,000. Her income did not win the game, did not win the day, but what did was time. So if we acknowledge our incomes won't ever be great, but we also recognize we can use time. If we use what we've got, we can do very well for ourselves. And that's what I want for you. I want you to have a great retirement. And if you don't have a ton of money to throw at it, you can still accomplish your goals if you recognize the power of time and you commit to fully using time. So there's a lot of encouragement, there's a lot of hope in this, that even those of us without great incomes can enjoy great retirements if we take advantage of time. And that's the key. We've got to play the game to our strength, and our strength is time. So, all right, that's the contest. That's a great way to start. I enjoy starting this way always. Let's take a look at what we have next. I want to walk you through some different scenarios. Now, we started with 2 scenarios between student number 1 and student number 2. Here are 6 scenarios. And in these 6 scenarios, we see different ways to get to $1 million. Each of these 6 scenarios results in the same outcome, exactly $1 million at age 65. But how you get there is quite different. So an example number 1 is the example where you do the least amount of work and time does the greatest amount of work. So in this scenario, someone at age 18 makes one single contribution of $10,307. Now, I don't know where you get $10,000 at age 18, but if you can find it, this person at age 18 puts $10,307, and that amount, if it grows at 10% per year, will reach $1 million in value by age 65. In this scenario, we are doing the least amount of work and time is doing the greatest amount of work. The next scenario, example number 2, also the person is 18. This is very similar to the student who won, but the student who won ended up with more than $1 million by putting in $2,000 8 times. So if we scale that back to 1756 8 times, then that person would end up with $1 million instead of 1.1. So, and they would do $14,000 worth of savings or work versus the 10,307 above, because it was spread out over a little bit of time. So it had to do a little more work. Example number 3 is the other student, the student who did not win. That student began at age 26 and diligently for 40 years made $2,000 contributions and ended up a little under $1 million. So if we bump that up to $2,054 per year, he ends up at $1 million. But you realize that he had to do $82,000 worth of work versus the $14,000 worth of work of example 2. Examples 4, 5, and 6 just show what it would look like if someone started at ages 30, 40, and 50, what amount of money they would need to put in, and the total amount of work they would be doing. They'd be doing $100,000, $200,000, and $400,000 worth of work, as opposed to much smaller numbers. So over on the right, I basically have a visualization of this as well. I want you to see what this looks like. Form, you can see how this represents how much work we are doing to get to that $1 million goal. Now, personally, I'm obviously motivated to do the least amount of work and still reach the goal. What that means is letting time do as much work as possible. So time is your new best friend. In this chart, I want to basically show you the math and how this plays out. It's really pretty simple. I built this in Excel. You can do it as well in just like a minute or two. I start on the left with a column for like the time or the year. That's a year 1, 2, 3, 4, down to 8. And you can go down as far as you want. You can go down 50 rows, 100 rows. It's really easy. Then I drop in an age just so I can kind of keep track of the age, my age or the age of the person I'm working with. And then I start with a beginning balance for January 1. It starts with $2,000. The next column is empty. We're going to do this again in a moment. We'll populate that middle column at that point, but right now we're going to leave it empty. This is a single contribution of $2,000 that's growing by 10%. So that's the rate of return, 10%. So in year 1, the $2,000 growing at 10% grows by $200 and ends up with $2,200. Now the ending balance of $2,200 becomes the beginning balance. The next year it grows by 10% again, this time by $220 because it's a little bit higher, and you end up at $24.20, which becomes the new beginning balance, and you go back and forth. You can see how this works. It's really very straightforward and simple. We can chart it out, and it looks like this, exactly what you would think it would look like. Now, let's go back and fill in that center column so that we have not only an initial $2,000, but in years 2 through 8, we add $2,000 each year. So 2,000 grows to be 2,200. That becomes the beginning balance. But a new contribution on January 1 adds to that. So now you have 4,200. And so in that year, 10%, it grows by 420 and it ends at 4,620. So this, and it continues through. You can see this is just each year you add $2,000 and what it looks like for that. Now this introduces a really interesting question. So in the contest, student number 1 won. And how does this math show why she won? Well, I added a little blue arrow as a hint. Take a look at that. The column called return earned. Originally, it's just 200 bucks, right? It's the 10%. That's also the return earned is what I'm calling time, what time will do for you. And notice that the initial return in year 1 is modest. $200 is not a ton of money. $420, not such a huge amount of money. Okay, whatever. But by the time you get to year 8, notice that the return earned, or the work that time is doing for you, is $2,287. It's actually larger than our contribution. Our annual contribution is $2,000 a year. So time at that point is beginning to do more work and contributing more to the increase in value than our contributions were. That's interesting because student number 2, who did not win, began saving the next year at age 26, but he began with $2,000. Well, by this point in time, student number 1 was already receiving from time, the return earned, more than $2,000. So she had the lead at that point and would never give it up because her amount was growing at a faster rate than the second student who started at age 26. So this shows mathematically how and why student number 1 won the contest. And I think that's really cool for any math geeks out there. Okay, so this is a chart of what we just looked at, how it grows a little faster when it's $2,000 a year. I want to look at this from one other angle, which is this angle. So you'll see at the bottom, there's a white contribution that shows up in year 1 of $2,000, and it grows to $2,200, $2,420, and it grows over time. After 8 years, that first white contribution grows to be $4,287. Now notice that in year 2, there's a second contribution made of $2,000. It's that olive green color, and it grows for 7 years because it starts in year 2. So by year 8, it kind of peaks out at $3,897. It doesn't reach the same $4,287 as the first year did because it had 1 year less time. That's logical, makes a ton of sense. So if you look at column year 8 as a column, the white portion is the tallest, then the olive, then the blue, then the pink. They get shorter and shorter and shorter as they had less time to grow. So while your bank statement will say you have $25,000 in that account, which is true, that $25,000 was created by these 8 contributions and what they grew to be. And so the most important one was the one that had the most time to grow. That's really the key takeaway from this. Now, in the next view, I want to show you something that's kind of a culmination view of everything that's going on. And so, sorry about that. This is a chart that kind of tests our understanding of what we've been talking about. It has 8 columns that are yellow, and it has 48 that are blue. Those correlate with the 8 years of the student number 1's $2,000 investments and the 40 years of student number 2's $2,000 investments. And the volume under the curve represents the value that those investments grew to be. Now you'll notice that the column at the far right, the yellow column with a 48 under it, grew for over 48 years, grew to nearly $200,000. All of these began as $2,000 investments. But what they ended up being is highly dependent on how much time they had to grow. And so this shows us again how and why the student number one won is because her 8 investments were more valuable at the end than the 40 investments of student number 2. Isn't that remarkable? And that's why starting early and letting time run and maximize its return is so valuable to you. Now, there's a second thing I want to highlight from this because on the one hand, letting time do work for you is the easiest way to make money possible. You do what you can, you make your contributions as early as you can, and then you let time take over from there. It's the easiest approach. But it's also true that there is something that is difficult about it. And I don't want you to be surprised when you experience this difficulty. In fact, I call this difficulty the valley of death. The valley of death begins primarily in the it occurs primarily in the early years of the process. Because remember, in year 1, the first return was only $200, second return, $400. They're modest amounts, and it's easy to begin to doubt the math. It's easy to question. I know I believed him at the time, but is the math really true? Will it really play out? I don't really see it. The numbers I see are still small. You start to lose faith and confidence that what is true is actually true, that things will work out over time when you give it enough time. The other thing that happens is that usually those early years occur when we are younger in life, in an earlier life stage. And I tell you what, those years early in life, late teens, 20s, those are tough in the sense that there are so many things coming at you. There are many, many demands on your financial resources. So take, for example, you want to move from driving around town in a moped to a car with 4 wheels. You also want to begin to pursue a future spouse, and pursuing those potential future spouses is expensive. And then you are lucky enough to land a future spouse, and there's a wedding and a honeymoon and a ring and all sorts of expense. And then you with your new spouse want to move from an apartment to a house, and that requires a down payment and all sorts of expenses. So there's so many demands on your finances in those early years. It's very easy to look at this nest egg and say, hey, I'm 4 years in, I've made 4 contributions of $2,000. I've invested $8,000 and it's grown to maybe $9,000 or $10,000, and that's exactly what I need for my down payment or for my honeymoon or for the whatever. And so it's very tempting to take that money and to go spend it in that way. But what happens when you do is that you are starting over, because you are now, instead of 4 years into the process, you are 0 years into the process. And what happens is you end up cutting off the 4 yellow years on the far right, because you can never have those back. You won't be able to. You now have a shorter amount of time between where you are at that point in time and retirement. Retirement is 4 years earlier, so you have 4 years less time for that money to grow. And so all of a sudden, those 4 tallest columns are no longer available to you, and you are starting over. Now, if you lose 4 years, those are painful years to lose, but you might justify it as okay. But what if you are now 25 or 30 and you're like, oh, now I have fewer years still. And so I highlight this simply to say that the valley of death is a difficult time. The returns aren't impressive, so you may be losing confidence, and there's a lot of demands on your finances. But if you can persevere, you have great rewards waiting for you. So I want to highlight, so you are not surprised, that this is both the easiest way to make money, and yet it will still have difficulties. You will have to kind of fight to protect your nest egg and to preserve it so it can continue to grow through that period of time. So there's some key lessons that we've learned so far. This is actually kind of a midway point in this presentation. One, we've learned that time is the best friend of the young. It's really everyone's best friend, but it really will do powerful, powerful things for younger folks. Therefore, please begin utilizing and taking advantage of what time is begging to do for you. Begin saving now, if at all possible. And then secondly, $2,000 a week is, there's nothing magical about that number, but I break it down to say, hey, whatever number, whatever amount of money you can set aside will be beneficial. Time does amazing things. It turns small amounts into large amounts. So begin saving with whatever amount you have available. Now, let me ask you this. What if this is you? I often have people respond, say, that is so compelling. I buy in. This is great. But I don't even have a job. I don't have an income. How do I start saving when I don't have any money coming in? So here's my advice for you if this is the situation you're in. If you do not have an income, if you cannot begin saving, then you cannot begin taking steps toward or forward toward your goals of savings and beginning that journey. But the number one thing you want to do, if you cannot take a step forward, is you want to make sure you avoid taking a step backward. And what I mean by taking a step backward is you want to avoid getting into debt while you do not have an income. Because when you go into debt, you have now taken steps backwards and you need to retrace those steps to get back to zero in order to be able to meaningfully move forward again. And the worst part is that it takes time to retrace those steps and get back to zero. And that time it takes removes yellow years. You're cutting off yellow years while you are retracing those steps. So the number one advice I have for people who are not yet able to move forward is to make sure you do everything you can to avoid moving backwards, because that is time you don't want to spend getting back to zero. So debt takes many forms. We're very familiar with debt: credit card debt, mortgage debt, all sorts of debt, student loan debt, you name it, lots of different flavors of it. Debt, however, severely limits your lifestyle. If you couldn't live on your income without it, you certainly can't live on income with it, because it consumes a portion of your income that it used to not. And so I spend a lot of time helping people get out of debt, and there's no easy way out of debt. Really, I just end up encouraging them through the inevitable process. I want you to avoid the pain of being in debt and the lack of flexibility to make the choices you want to make in life that occur when you are in debt. So I want to ask you a question. Why does this guy love you so much? And here's part of the answer. We just looked at this chart. These are $2,000 investments growing at 10% per year. What I want to do next is I'm going to contrast this chart. This chart will get very small. I'm going to contrast this chart with a chart that's the same chart, but instead of growing at 10% a year, it's growing at 18% a year. And I want to show you what this looks like versus an 18% growth rate. So here you go. Here it comes. Whoa, where'd our chart go? So you can see there's a very small chart. It's the 10% growth chart down at the bottom. And then there's an 18% growth chart. The guy sitting on the coins loves you because you are indebted to him. You are paying interest to him, and he loves it. Now, granted, debt comes with lots of different interest rates. Credit card debt, however, is often 18 to 20 to more than 20%, so that's not at all unreasonable. Other forms of debt are less expensive, and that's great. We like that. But what I really want to highlight is that our goal is to make us wealthy, not to make other people wealthy. The way we accomplish that is by not paying interest to other people, but by paying interest to ourselves, earning the interest instead of paying the interest. That is a key to to good financial well-being later in life. I want you to enjoy the fruit of your labor. I want you to benefit from your income. I don't want your income to go pay to someone else in the form of paying interest payments. So that's a key. This guy loves you because you are making his life easy. You are making him rich. Let's try to make you rich instead. I often get the question, all right, Joe, I want to do this, but I'm in debt, so should I spend whatever money I can find? I want to start saving, but I'm in debt. So should I use the money I have to start saving, or should I use it to pay off my debt faster? And so I want to address that question simply by saying that usually it's best to pay off the debt first, because usually the interest rate on the debt is greater than the rate of return you can reliably earn investing it somewhere. So it's usually best to pay off the debt. But here's a caveat to that. There are people whose personalities are such, and you're still a wonderful person, even if you're this way, still love you. But there are people who will always be in debt because as soon as they get out of debt, their mind says, oh man, I just paid off my car. Now I can get a newer, fancier, better car. And so they get out of debt and they instantly go right back into debt. If that is you, recognize that about yourself, be honest with yourself, and acknowledge I'm never actually going to be out of debt. So I cannot wait to be out of debt to begin saving. I need to be saving while I'm in debt. If that's you, great, do that. Otherwise, if it's not you, probably try to pay off the debt and then begin saving in earnest for the reasons we just described. Now, debt can be a useful tool. There are times to go into debt, but I tell you what, most of the time we should be thinking about that much more negatively than we actually do, much more negatively than it is portrayed to us in the media. So most people severely underestimate the cost of debt. And often we take on debt in order to have things that we want instead of things that we have to have or need. Now, if you end up in the hospital and you have to go into the hospital to preserve your life, then by all means, please do and incur the debt. No problem with that. That's a must-have situation. But try to avoid debt for wants because those are the things that are most costly down the road. Debt should really be viewed much more negatively than it is. And the reason that it's viewed positively is that the only people who talk about debt are those who benefit from debt. They always talk about, hey, you can pay me back in these 4 easy payments. And it's always easy payments because they want you to be indebted to them. They want those 4 payments. They want your interest. And so the people who are in the debt game, who are talking, communicating to us as society, are the ones who are the beneficiaries of interest payments. So they want to tell you that debt is easy and no problem and all that kind of stuff. That's the only message you will hear. Very few voices like mine are out there to say debt is really a huge trap that you need to avoid like the plague. That's a lot more true. So there just isn't an incentive for people to be sharing that message is the key point. So avoiding debt and paying off your debt and eliminating it altogether, being totally debt free should be a very high priority in your life. And so I strongly encourage that you pursue minimal debt as much as possible so that you can be the beneficiary of your work. And ultimately, debt delays your ability to save because it consumes time to get back to zero, and that eats away or eliminates your yellow years, those most powerful, valuable years for you. I want you to capitalize on and benefit from those years. I don't want you to lose them to getting out of debt. So that's the truth about debt. It should be viewed a lot more negatively than it actually is. Now, there's an opportunity cost, and I'm probably going to underwhelm you with the beginning of the slide. I hope I kind of pull it out by the end of the slide, but you'll understand what I mean here. So I like Cokes. I like to drink Cokes. I think Coke tastes delicious. And so let's say that I hypothetically drink 5 Cokes per week. Now, I could decide to scale back from 5 Cokes a week to 4 Cokes a week. And if I did that, perhaps I could save myself $2 by not buying a Coke. And I could tell you that, hey, if I didn't buy a Coke and if I invested that $2, then 12 years from now I could have $6, or 24 years from now I could have $20, or 48 years from now I could have 194. That's not very compelling to most people because they're small numbers and they're way out in the future. And we have a tendency to think life won't matter in the future. That's not true at all, but we think that nonetheless. But let me remind you that I'm not just talking about one Coke once. I'm talking about a habit, something I do all the time. One Coke a week, going from 5 to 4 each week. So if I look at it on an annual basis, now all of a sudden saving $2 per week, $2 times 52 weeks, is much bigger numbers. I could have $326 or 1,000 or 10,000. Those numbers are still not that compelling. So let me just remind you, I don't even have it on the slide, but let me remind you that that's for per week for 1 year. Multiply that by 10 or 20 or 30 years. Now all of a sudden, okay, multiply those numbers by 10 or 20. All right. Okay, I can maybe see your point, Joe. You're warming on me a little bit. Let's move to a movie theater versus rental. These are habitual decisions that we make all the time. So it's cheaper to stream a movie from our living room than it is to go to the theater usually. And so I'm not saying don't watch the movie, but how you go about it is relevant. And so maybe it's $5 cheaper to stream it, rent it versus going to the theater. Often it's a lot more than that because you have to pay per person at the theater, and you can just pay one streaming fee in your living room. But nonetheless, let's just say it's $5. Well, if you avoided the movie theater once and streamed it once, you'd save $5, which turns into small numbers over time. But if we do it again on a weekly basis, the numbers become a lot bigger. And if we think about it on a weekly basis for many years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, those numbers get to add up. Now, interestingly, I don't want to pick on movie theaters because I like going to movie theaters. It's fun. But our family has decided that we value other things more than we value going to the movie theater. So we've decided to not go to the movie theater and instead save that money for things that we want more, that we value more, that are more important to us. And so I don't care where you fall on the movie theater side of things. Maybe you still want to go, maybe you don't. I don't know. The key is it is very important for us all to individually, and if you're married as a couple, to think about and identify what are the things that are most important to you, because no one can afford to have the best house and the best clothes and eat out the most and all this. You can't have the best of everything. You have to pick and choose, but you can have the best of the things that matter the most to you if you become disciplined and learn how to say no to the things that are lower on the list. So for us, going to the movie theater is lower on the list, and we say no to that so that we can say yes to the things that are more important. And that's a really important discipline that I want to encourage you to build in your life because it will serve you extremely well. Okay, next example is a nicer car. Usually when you are looking for a new automobile, you'll look at a few different options. Maybe one is a standard option, one might be a convertible, one might be a four-cylinder, one might be six, one might be two-wheel drive or four. There's lots of features that differentiate more or less expensive cars. And as you're considering the option, I just want to equip you with the opportunity cost understanding of what's going on. So I'm not saying to buy or to not buy the nicer car, but to be informed when you make that decision. So if you're thinking about maybe a $20,000 car versus a $24,000 car, so again, that $4,000 delta, whatever the price points are, assume a $4,000 delta. If you choose to go with the less expensive car and can have the discipline to actually save and invest that $4,000 delta, then you can see what that $4,000 grows to over time. It's actually a pretty substantial amount of money. Okay, well, I was about to buy the more expensive car, but if I think about it this way, uh, these are, those are kind of compelling numbers. That would affect my life would be better off if I had another $40,000 or $12,000 or whatever it is. So it's good to be informed as you make decisions. And again, the goal isn't to not spend money. I do want you to splurge on yourself and on others, but I want you to balance that. Last one is living off of campus versus eating out. As a freshman in college many moons ago, I lived in the dorm as a freshman and I ate at the pit. I had a meal plan. It was all prepaid and it was very cost effective. But I noticed, or I perceived, and I believed that a lot of the cooler kids lived off campus and they didn't come onto campus to eat in the pit. They ate out in restaurants. And even if the restaurant was just a Subway, it seemed more glamorous and sophisticated. And I wanted to be those things. I wanted to be the cool person. And so I finagled a way for my sophomore, junior, and senior year to live off campus, but that costs more. It costs about $3,500 a year more. And so at the time, I was so fixated on just being one of them, one of those cooler people, that it didn't really matter what it cost to me. I wasn't perhaps thinking it through very well. But in the end, I'm not sure that it actually changed who I was at all. I don't think it changed people's perception. I don't think it made me a cool person. So it was kind of a dud of an experiment, but it did successfully cost me $3,500 a year to try. And so that ended up being what, times three, $10,500. I didn't know at the time that if I had not spent that extra money and if I had just saved it and invested it instead, that I would be well on my way right now to a very substantial retirement amount from that single decision. And I didn't really view it as a $1 million decision, but it really, really was. And so the opportunity cost of spending the money that I had that way versus saving it or investing it cost me $1 million at retirement. And I kind of kicked myself. Honestly, if you had put this information in front of me at the time, I don't know if I would have made a different decision or not. I really wanted to be cool that badly. But nonetheless, I want to equip you so that you can wrestle with these decisions and make as many wise decisions as possible. So again, I said earlier, I want you to enjoy life. I don't want you to spend all your money and not save any of it and miss out on your yellow years, but I also don't want you to save it all and miss out on living life. So balance is really the key that we're after here. Now, I often speak to college classes, and this is an ideal topic for them because they're often younger, and education is usually a phenomenal investment. So I strongly recommend getting the education you need to pursue the career that you want in life. That is generally an excellent path, and I strongly encourage it. But with that said, it is not an excuse to treat all education-related expenses as a blank check. It is still very important to have discipline in pursuing that education as cost effectively as possible. So you want to minimize your debt because it is still debt at the end of the day, debt that has to be paid back, debt that takes time to be paid back, time that costs you your yellow years. So it still has a significant impact. So tuition is a factor. If pursue the education cost effectively, you may choose not to go to the most expensive school. You might choose to go to a less expensive school for this reason. I encourage you to pursue scholarships every single year, constantly. And I encourage you to consider living on campus or even at home if that is necessary to get the education you need more cost effectively. Now, there was a time when my parents' age, they went through school and it was normal for students to work while they went through school and to kind of pay their way through school such that when they graduated, they had zero debt. And when I went through college, that wasn't so common anymore. And today it's not that common. But I would encourage you to consider what it would take or what it would have to look like for you to do that. Because coming out of college with zero debt is a tremendous gift to yourself. So pursue the education you need. It is worth it. But still make it a goal to leave college with as little debt as possible and ideally totally debt free. You will thank yourself a million times over if you can. Now, buying a car is an interesting topic, so we're going to dwell on that for a second. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you would feel good about paying $12,000 for a $10,000 car, or 12,100 even? That's 21% more than the car is worth. Well, not many of us would feel good about that. How would you feel about paying $8,800 for a $10,000 car? Well, I don't know, maybe a $10,000 car is still too expensive, but you would certainly feel better, at least about paying less than it is technically worth. So let's talk about what a car payment looks like. So first of all, we'll go down the finance path. So if you buy a car for $10,000, put on 60-month payment plan, 8% interest, you'll have a monthly payment of 203 per month. So in the end, you're going to pay back the principal of $10,000. You'll pay interest of 2166, and you will in total pay 12,166 for that car. You'll pay the 12,100 that I talked about in the very first question. You'll pay 21% more than the car is worth because you had to finance it. So let me just highlight that that is always true every time you finance anything, whether it's a car or groceries or a house, you name it, anything that you finance, you are ultimately going to pay significantly more for that item than it is worth because you are going to pay for the item plus the interest charges, the finance charges. So that makes it a lot less appealing to me because I don't like paying 21% more than something's worth. And so it motivates me to say, all right, well, maybe it's worth trying to save up the cash so I don't have to pay the 21% overage for fee. Now, there's another advantage to paying the cash, though. It's that you can not only avoid paying interest, but you can earn interest. And so if we look at paying it from a work perspective, remember, work is the money you set aside, it's not the interest. Don't get me wrong, when you go to the car dealership, you will write a check for the $10,000 necessary for a $10,000 car. You will write a check for $10,000. But the work that you had to put into that might be less if you were earning interest. In this scenario, the work would be $8,800, $8,823, and the interest would be $1,177. So you did $8,800 worth of work instead of 10,000. So you actually saved yourself 11%. You kind of got it at 11% discount because the interest paid for the other portion. You didn't have to set that part aside yourself. That wasn't work you did. That's work time did for you. So there's a big difference between paying 21% over versus 11% less. In fact, there's a 32% difference. 21 plus 11, 32% difference between those. So do you see that from a work perspective, from the amount of money you need to set aside and save, you are getting 32%, you're paying 32% more by financing the car for it in cash. That is remarkable. What's also remarkable is it's not true only of cars, it's true of everything. If you want to have 32% more groceries, 32% more clothes, 32% more house, 32% more car, you can apply this to just about everything. Now, granted, the rates will vary depending on what you're buying, so it won't always be 32. But nonetheless, you will always overpay versus underpay if you are earning interest versus paying interest. So that's a major takeaway, and I want you to hear that clearly on the slide, because I would love it if my boss gave me a 30% raise. That would make me so happy. And yet, even if he doesn't give me the raise, and he never has given me a 30% raise, I can give myself a 30% raise by learning how to avoid paying interest and learning how to earn interest in the way I go about buying things. Let's look at that as a practical example on the next slide, staying with this car idea. So is it possible to pay cash for a car? Yes. Do you need time up front somewhere? Yes. So in this scenario, you pay $200 to yourself always. You never stop paying yourself $200 a month. Ever. Never stop. So the first 12 months, you pay yourself $200 a month. I don't know how you're getting around. You're bumming rides from family members, from your mom, from friends, whatever. But for 12 months, you're saving up $200 a month. You get $2,400. You buy this beauty called the Chevy Cavalier. It might not get you married, but it will get you around, and it will allow you to be safe. But while you are driving it, you still continue to pay yourself, not someone else, yourself, $200 a month. This time you pay yourself $200 a month for 18 months. So now you've got a Chevy Cavalier that's paid for and $3,600. You take both of those in, and 18 months later, you pick up your Jeep. Now you're pretty thrilled with this Jeep because you think it's way better than the Cavalier. It's older still, so you're not totally thrilled. You still want to keep upgrading, but you're happy about where you are, happier. Again, you never, ever, ever stop paying yourself $200 a month, and you start earning interest. I haven't even factored the interest into this that you're earning. But now, for the 24 months while you're driving the Jeep, you continue to pay that. Now you have $4,800 plus a Jeep. You take that in and you get the Tahoe. So there's it is absolutely possible to pay cash for a car, and this is what it looks like to begin the discipline that allows you to capture that 30% more of everything. Instead of paying interest, you're earning interest, and this is what it looks like. So make your money work for you so that you don't have to pay the interest to somebody else. So what did we learn today? Here's a quick wrap up. Time is your best friend, particularly if you are young. Please get to know time well. Take time up on its offer to do work for you. You want to do as little work as possible. You want time to do as much work as possible. So don't miss out on the yellow years, the early years. Start saving right away. I would encourage you, I did not talk about this in the presentation, but I'd encourage you to get a 1-year subscription to some personal finance magazine. Learn the financial basics of what a mutual fund is, and you name it, whatever, because you will need to have that basic financial literacy to earn the types of return that we're talking about. I often get asked, hey, use 10%. Where can I earn 10%? You can never, there's no interest rate of 10% that you can consistently get. But if you look at over the long term, the stock market has averaged, depending on your definition of long term in the stock market, between 8 to 12%. So I picked 10 in the middle, nice round number. It is realistic over the long term, at least historically, it has been realistic to expect 10%. Now, the stock market's all over. You have big years up, big years down. You'll probably never have a 10% year, but if you average it out, that's what it's been. So that's a good place for you to start. I can't tell you what the future will hold, no guarantees, but that's what the history would suggest for us. So learn the financial basics so that you can actually capitalize on this opportunity. Now, debt is the second half of the presentation is all about debt and the importance of avoiding debt and the importance of looking at it realistically and not opportunistically, not believing the sales ads that they're easy payments. They're not easy for us. They're only easy for the person who receives it. So be really smart. I want you to enjoy life and spend some money. I also want you to save some money while you're doing it. Get the education you need while you're going through college, and try to pay cash for your car. Try to pay cash for everything so that you can enjoy 30% more of everything. I wish you the best of luck as you go through life. I hope that this has been helpful to you. Thank you very much for your time tonight.